Saurabh, how do you feel being constantly described as possibly India's first openly gay judge? It's almost become a cliche. The operative word is possibly.
Well, yes. Even possibility goes further and further away from certainty after 6 years. It has been, of course, a long wait for me, and that's true. But in terms of stereotyping and typecasting that you're talking of, I don't think it's unique to me. I have opened a chapter of discussion on gay rights in India. That does make me happy. It gives me satisfaction.
Intelligence inputs that raised objections to your being made a judge. Two reasons were cited. One, that you have a partner who is not Indian. And second, that you were so passionately attached to the sort of cause of LGBTQ rights that you would not be neutral. So have you stopped being hopeful about this happening?
I am as less hopeful as I was from day one.
How does your partner feel about being a news headline every few months?
I think he's probably not as used to it as I am. Secondly, a lot of the trolling happens in our country not on Twitter and on other social media. It happens on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And that is no way a judge can avoid, because that will be sent to your WhatsApp. So you open your phone, even content that you have not chosen to see will come into your phone.
Do you get a lot of that?
Oh yes, I get.
And are they sort of, is it like sexualized slander, or is it threats? Is it, what?
More abuse than threat. You know, it was very much in school that I realized. And it's not something that happens that you wake up one morning, and at least in the 70s and 80s it didn't happen. My God, I'm gay. Because the idea of sex was also such a
closed subject.
I think people barely realized they were straight, let alone that they were gay. Yeah, the idea of sex was taboo. No one discussed it.
Yeah.
We didn't have sex ed classes. Absolutely. I got crank calls, come and meet me in Lodi Garden, Rekha. These kind of things happened in school. I was called a girl's name and say, you come and meet me there.
Tell me this, how tough was it to come out to your family? Your father was, former Chief Justice, and I don't know how his first response was, because I'm sure there was his constitutional training in the principles of equality, and then there was him being a regular Indian parent.
Well, I think the constitutional equality won in that battle. Sedition today does not have a place in our dogma of free speech. It really doesn't. Who says Parliament is supreme? Allegedly the Constitution, right?
So it's the Constitution that is supreme.
So yes, in our framework, the ultimate authority really is the Constitution. So Parliament is not supreme. And the moment we accept that Parliament is not supreme, the question then arises, if the Constitution is supreme, who says what the Constitution is? What does the Constitution say? And the Constitution itself gives that right to the Supreme Court.
Saurabh, how do you feel being constantly described as possibly India's first openly gay judge? It's almost become a cliche. The operative word is possibly.
Well, yes. Even possibility goes further and further away from certainty after 6 years. It has been, of course, a long wait for me, and that's true. But in terms of stereotyping and typecasting that you're talking of, I don't think it's unique to me. In these days of polarity and reductionism, when everything is reduced to the simplest common factor that people can answer and understand in a soundbite, it's not surprising that this happened. I have become clickbait of a sort. to which I suppose
You have become a keyword.
yes, possibly a keyword. Yes, I know. I see that when I go on the net, and we all do ego searches once in a while. It's sitting, getting bored, so you do that, and I see that.
What you see, does that make you sad, or does it make you satisfied in a way that, in a way, you have framed one of the critical conversations around sort of gay rights in India?
It doesn't certainly make me sad. As I said, partly because of the inevitability of it. It's something I knew would happen. It doesn't make me proud because it reminds me of how much this country still has to go in terms of understanding nuance and in public conversation. But you're right, to some extent, i.e. to the extent that I have opened a chapter of discussion on gay rights in India. That does make me happy. It gives me satisfaction that a lot of the work that I had done has resulted, if not in fruition completely, but at least it started the conversation. So it's like a tryst with destiny, and it's happening. We are not fully free, but but we are getting there. So I don't mind the cliche at all.
You're not cynical. How many years this conversation has been taking place? It's been what, since 2017? We're in 2023. For all these years, you've been possibly India's first openly gay judge, and you haven't become a judge, despite the Collegium reiterating it a second time, which actually means the government has no option but to accede to the Collegium's decision.
Well, what the law is, that of course everybody knows. And I have made my peace with it, and I have spoken about it in the past as well, that my name is gone. I have faith in the system. Presumably the law will take its own course, and what will be done will be done. It's beyond my pay grade really to worry about it and think about it. So I don't dwell too much on this, to be honest.
Something very unprecedented happened with your case. The Supreme Court placed in the public domain, and there's been a lot of debate over whether they should have done that or not, intelligence inputs that raised objections to your being made a judge. Two reasons were cited. One, that you have a partner who is not Indian. And second, that you were so passionately attached to the sort of cause of LGBTQ rights that you would not be neutral. Right? Let's start with the first, a foreign partner.
Well, yes, it's a fact that my partner is a Swiss national. We have been together for 20 years, 17 of which he has lived in India. To say that it is an intelligence input, I think if you parse it down, there is a distinction when you come out with any report between your sources and the conclusion, right? And obviously you cannot disclose sources because that would lead to a problem for the intelligence community. You'll reveal your sources. But if the conclusion is something which is already in the public domain, then there is really no worry in terms of releasing it to the public, right? I have never hid the fact that I am gay and I have a foreign partner. I put my photographs on Instagram. We go out to social events together. People can see us. So it's really not a surprise that...
It didn't need intelligence gathering to establish this fact. Facebook was enough. Instagram was enough.
I don't know what the sources are. We still don't know the sources behind why the IB gave that report. That has not been leaked. That may not have been revealed to the Collegium either. I do not know. But the fact is, what has been revealed is not any source or anything which is very sensitive. So that's point number one. And I'm not going to defend myself as to whether he's a foreign national, whether that makes it right or not, because the matter is under consideration.
No, I think our viewers might want to know, when you read about your life in those terms, and you know that other people are reading about it too. They're consuming this sort of narrative that Saurabh Kirpal's, what does it boil down to? That we can't trust this man to be a judge because he actually loves a non-Indian, right? That's what it is. What emotion does that trigger?
Nothing. Look, one thing...
No hurt, no anger, no...
None whatsoever.
Why?
Because as lawyers, and if you are a good lawyer, you learn to engage with every conversation that comes your way. A judge will ask a question, the other side opposing you will make all kinds of arguments. You can't simply poo-poo them and say they're irrelevant and therefore I will not engage. I will disown them, I will discredit them. It may be a legitimate question, it may not be a legitimate question. So I engage with it. So I don't feel as though I'm being targeted. This could be a thought in someone's mind as to how is it that a judge can have a foreign partner. To which I will only say that I must first understand as to what the concern is. One is to have a foreign partner per se, which is wrong. But that does not automatically lead to a conclusion that I am therefore incapable of being a judge, in as much as no judge ever gets secret, sensitive, classified information. Everything a judge does is in the public domain. The arguments are made in public. Now that the sealed cover procedure has also been done away with, more or less, there is really nothing that a judge does. And there's some great idea about how fancy a judge's life is, and they're taking political decisions, and they're running the country. 99% of the job of a judge is very mundane. They are deciding matters of property disputes. They decide matters about employment and promotion and salaries. There's no national interest involved in that, in the sense of there being a national security implication. To the extent that delivering of justice is a nationally important thing, that's fine.
You've also pointed out that there are several other public figures, including in this government, who have foreign spouses.
Yes, that's true. Foreign spouses, and frankly, if you are talking about it, and it's possibly maybe a case that you change your passport after getting married. That is not possible for me.
Because there's no marriage equality.
There is no marriage equality. Secondly, if you distrust someone because they have a foreign spouse, the foreign spouse will not lose allegiance to the country that they have just by switching passports. If you are a man or a woman of straw and are going to be so easily swayed by the predilections or the views of your partner, then the fact that the partner has a red colored passport or a blue colored passport or any other colored passport doesn't matter. Or indeed even an Indian passport, but they come from, in the past, a foreign country. They may continue to harbor love for that country. So it can't be a disqualification. It certainly isn't, as we see evidence of it in the present government and in past.
But when you see your elevation sort of delay as a response, one time the government says no, now it can't say no, so it can just sit on the file, perhaps. What I'm trying to understand is, how can you be so free from cynicism? Because we're batchmates, right? We went to school and college together, which means we're the same age, 51?
Yes, 51.
For you to become a judge today, let's say this happens and you are finally India's first openly gay judge, and that possibly goes from the prefix. Would it make career sense for you? It's been so late. Would you even be able to rise to the top of a court?
Well, that's certainly the case, that if I were to become a judge today, by virtue of the fact that it has been delayed a bit, I would certainly not rise to the top. I would not go to the Supreme Court. I may not even become a Chief Justice of a High Court. I'll be very old compared to my peers on the bench. But so much of being a judge is public service, that if you think it's about yourself and your own promotion, then you're doing it for a wrong reason. Because a judge's life is very hard, very tough. That's point number one, really, as to why I think it doesn't make me a difference. But more importantly, I have always said that one of the reasons I want to be a judge is because it's important for the queer community to have a role model, to break that glass ceiling, really. And if it is about the community and not about myself, then it matters little whether I will progress much further in my career or not.
So have you stopped being hopeful about this happening?
I am as less hopeful as I was from day one. I never knew this. I knew this would never be an easy ride. I knew what I was getting into, and time has proved me correct. But cynicism is something that will only gnaw away at my own sense of worth and self-esteem. So I think I try to ignore the negativity of it and try to be.
How does your partner feel about being a news headline every few months?
I think he's probably not as used to it as I am. But I think he's also reasonably sanguine. We both try to keep away from social media a bit. I'm on Twitter, I'm on all the social
What's
media.
the worst thing you've read about yourself?
I think.
I mean, they're terrible. I get trolled all the time, so
Yes.
we have some sense of the depths people can plummet
not
to.
safe for work, let's put it that way.
But when you read that crap, right, you can't be this robotic, I'm never impacted, I'm never hurt, I'm never cynical, I'm never angry. There must be, you get used to it. We all learn to grow thick hides and ignore the rubbish. But there would have been a time when you are on social media and people are saying homophobic, terrible things. I remember interviewing Karan Johar once, and he actually read through some of the things that were said about him. Have those, how do you respond to those? Do you just ignore them? Do you speed read them? Do you laugh at them?
Well, that's a range of emotions, but I never get upset by them. I know it sounds surprising, and it sounds maybe I'm lying about it, and no one can be made of that stuff, really. But again, I think that comes from my legal training. Every day you go to court and you make a small error, or even if you don't make an error, the judge will shout at you. So I've grown up for the last 30 years in my legal practice being told off by a judge. So no matter how important and senior you think you are,
the judge cuts you down to size.
Judge cuts you down.
I think the point you've also made is that judges get trolled terribly. We don't know the judges are on social media lurking behind some fake identity, but I'm sure they know what's being said about them.
Correct.
And I think you've made the point that they get trolled worse than you do.
Yes. Well, that's absolutely the case. Look, a judge need not have a fake ID to go and check what's on Twitter. These are open platforms. You can do it without account. Secondly, a lot of the trolling happens in our country not on Twitter and on other social media. It happens on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And that is no way a judge can avoid, because that will be sent to your WhatsApp. So you open your phone, even content that you have not chosen to see will come into your phone.
Do you get a lot of that?
Oh yes, I get.
And are they is it like sexualized slander, or is it threats? Is it what?
More abuse than threats. I think.
Directly to your WhatsApp on your phone?
A couple of times, yes.
That's a violation of your space, right?
Not really, because abuse is something I can deal with. If it were threats, yes, it would be a bit more concerning, I suppose. But I've been fortunate enough not to receive that on WhatsApp, at least.
Have you received threats otherwise? In language, verbal
thinly
threats?
veiled threats. But, these are anonymous Twitter trolls who say it with
what do they say?
30, 40, 50 followers.
But what do they say?
To be honest, I'd rather not discuss it. But you get a sense of that they do not like you. At the very least, you can be certain of that fact. And so I don't take it very seriously, because it is not sent seriously. As I said, a Twitter user who's got anonymous handle and has 50 followers doesn't have the wherewithal to do anything really, other than just rant on Twitter. So you realize that as well.
So given these abuses, the fact that they don't like you, the fact that the government has dragged its feet on accepting the Collegium's recommendation to make you a judge, do you believe that you will be a judge? Do you believe you will be India's first gay judge?
I think the question is not about belief, but about hope.
Do you hope?
I hope so.
Do you think your hope is legitimate, given the delay?
The question of belief through the back door, and that's something as a lawyer I see.
So just instinctively, if I were to ask you, Saurabh, is this going to happen in your life?
May well do. This country is changing. Look, if I had no hope, no belief, I would have withdrawn my consent. But the fact is, you never know about things. So, as I said, if I put my name in the system, I have to have faith in the system. I believe in the system. This country is changing. Its politics are changing. People are changing. Who knows what the future holds?
Let's go back a few years, many years now, given how old we are. In school, when do you first realize that you're gay? Is it school? Is it before?
Yes, it was school, very much so. Before school,
and we're in the same school,
yes,
so we're in a co-ed school.
Correct.
Right.
No, it was very much in school that I realized. And it's not something that happens that you wake up one morning, and at least in the 70s and 80s, it didn't happen. My God, I'm gay. because the idea of sex was also such a
Closed subject.
Closed subject. I think people barely realized they were straight, let alone that they were gay. Yeah, the idea of sex was taboo. No one discussed it.
Yeah.
We didn't have sex ed classes. It was, something brushed under the carpet, and children are born because storks come home. I don't know. So topic of sex itself was so taboo. And to add to that, the fact that you somehow thought you were different was in a way protective and also deeply disturbing. Protective because since sex was so taboo, it never formed a larger part of my life than it otherwise would have been. In today's world, I think sexuality is important for a teenager, as it should be. It's a natural thing. But it was artificially repressed, I think, in the early 80s when we were growing up. Right. Sexuality was really not a very big part of who we were in school, for at least a large number of us. It's not as though it was non-existent. We are humans and we are teenagers. But it wasn't discussed. It wasn't a big thing. So that was somewhat of a protective aspect. But of course, whenever anyone is queer and coming out, it's deeply worrying more than anything else. Because even before you read about it, at least then, because there was nothing to read about it, you start wondering, who am I, or what am I, and what has happened to me, what will become of me? All of these things rack you.
Yeah. So was there a sense of fear?
Of course. I was petrified. I was petrified.
And were you petrified because you felt you were not, at that time, the norm? Were you petrified, what will my parents say?
Well,
did you even understand it fully?
Each of the above. First, there was no information out there. So I didn't even understand why I liked other men or boys, actually. I was a boy myself then. Why I liked them and what that meant, I had just no clue. And I tried to convince myself, as one goes through that process, many people go through that process, saying, no, this is just something that is happening and on the side, and actually I really like girls. But of course, at some point it goes on, and you realize that's just not the case. Then you said, were you worried about, is it a norm and is it your parents, or who was I worried for? Well, certainly I was worried about my parents finding out and about society finding out. We don't live on islands, right? So it was a deep concern for me as to what will people think, what will people say? Because at that point, any bit of queer culture in media or in public discourse was highly derogatory. It was about a very effeminate man being mocked at by the macho person. And that is sort of quasi-bullying that happened in school as well.
Did you get bullied?
Not directly, but yes.
Jokes.
There were jokes.
Cruel jokes?
Yes. Absolutely. I got crank calls, come and meet me in Lodi Garden, Rekha. These kind of things happened in school. I was called a girl's name and say, you come and meet me there. Obviously, they were classmates. how else would they have?
You knew who they were?
I
had a sense.
I may have a sense, but I have no evidence that it was anyone, so I don't. So that happened. And, just bullying is not always about being directed at a person. It's also about creating an atmosphere where you do not feel comfortable. So when you are mocking an effeminate boy or someone who's not macho, and you are saying, rude terms, chakka, etc., to even if not to me, but to other people, that is hardly an atmosphere which is conducive to a well-rounded personality. And
did you hate your time at school?
I was not very fond of it. No, I was not overly fond of it. But I don't say it's only because of bullying. But look, again, I will not be the same reductionist person as I was.
Because there are other parts to you than being gay. And I think the important point that you make is that, at least in our time as kids, we were not obsessed with sex and sexuality, and there was so much else going on. But I do want to ask you, given that you were part of the big victory in the sort of Navteej Johar case where, homosexuality finally gets decriminalized. Are you hopeful about marriage equality becoming a reality? I know you've been very actively involved in the case. And then when you read that your advocacy or your passion for this cause is actually a disqualification in the eyes of the government, I mean, that's strange, right?
Well, I mean, government is entitled to have its views. It gave it. The Supreme Court has rejected that particular view, reiterated it. Now the law will take its own course. To be passionate about a cause might imply that you are thereby unable to decide a matter connected with that particular issue. And I can quite see that there would be a possible concern about that. But as I said, that the 99% of the work a judge does
is with other mundane matters.
And even matters of great public importance. I can only think of 2 cases so far that have concerned the queer community. 3 cases. The Nalsar judgment, which is about transgender rights. Navte Johar, which was about decriminalization. And the 3rd case, which is the marriage equality case. Now, in the 75 years of our history, only 3 cases have concerned itself with queer rights. So it's not as though a judge has to deal with queer rights on a daily basis. So there is no worry really of a conflict of interest. Because
I have a legal question on the marriage equality debate. And the legal question is this. You know, there are lawyers in the case, like Abhishek Singhvi, for example, who have suggested that basically you have to find the solution within the Special Marriage Act. You cannot open up all of the other laws. So leave everything else for now. Just find a way to equalize rights under the Special Marriage Act, which is, of course, for the benefit of our audience, a civil union, right? And so right now it's between a man and a woman. We're suggesting it can be between a woman and a woman and a man and a man if the Supreme Court upholds the right to marriage equality. But there are legal questions about what happens to all the other laws where there is a gender dimension, sexual violence, domestic abuse, inheritance, property. What happens to all of those?
Right. No, there is undoubtedly an issue about the fact that our laws are gendered.
Yeah.
Right. They are.
And rightfully so after decades of, feminist struggle.
Correct. So undoubtedly women need extra protection in certain spheres, and they have gotten that. Not fully, but at least partially. So the Domestic Violence Act protects women, not men. And as long as our laws are gendered, it's not going to be easy to fit the rubric of marriage equality on a template that exists. And some amount of tweaking will be necessary. But you don't always attempt to accomplish and erase all inequality in one fell swoop, in one go. That's not how judicial decision making takes place. That's not how society changes. That's not how laws change. You do it a step at a time. So there's nothing exceptional in terms of asking for marriage equality, formal equality, and then accepting the fact that there are other areas where you will have inequality or incongruity in certain ways, where you do not fit into that legal structure. Because those rough edges, so to say, will be polished with the passage of time. Now, I will give you a very simple example. We have equality between men and women theoretically under the Constitution of India in 1950. Yet, it is only in 2005 that women became equal members of the Hindu undivided family as co-parsonas. So that formal equality of 1950 coexisted very happily for 55 years of our republic with the idea that women could not sue for partition of a joint family property. So if that could happen, this is the same progress that happens. And change will be incremental. And I think it's good for change to be incremental because that also rests it on more solid foundations. I think if...
As opposed to dramatic overnight upheaval.
Correct. You see, there is a way law brings about change in society and is in fact reflexively itself changes. So law and society moves sort of hand in hand. Society may be reluctant to change in certain areas. So law will push it along. The law in this case, I mean the Constitution and the constitutional morality. So the law here will push the idea of society away from conservatism, but it can't stray so far away that that link between the two snaps.
So it was the same government in power when homosexuality was read down, albeit by the court. But I don't know how many people know, and therefore I just want to talk a little bit about this. You worked very closely with Arun Jaitley, who's no longer with us. You worked very closely with Mukul Rohatgi. one was a minister, a very senior minister in the government. One was a law officer with the government. At one point, was he not? Am I remembering? At one point. I'm not sure if he was when homosexuality was read down. My point was just to say that you worked closely with Mr. Jaitley at least. And from what I remember him telling me, he persuaded many people in the cabinet to allow this politically to take place. He became a votary. He didn't always start as a votary, but and he would always mention that you had played a big part in persuading him.
Well, I don't know how I persuaded him, probably by just living an open life and being accepted by my family and myself. But coming back to your point about Mukul, who was, of course,
yes,
then he stopped being AG, but he had been AG, Attorney General, just before. In any political party, or indeed any conglomeration of individuals in India, be it social or political or any other form, there is not a monolithic entity or a unity of ideology.
Of course.
There will be people with disparate views, and that is the nature of the political process, and that's good. So the way we have democracy, which is reflected and reflective of different and often competing and often incommensurable ideas in the public domain, the same thing exists even within a political party, I presume. And then it will be a question of who is in charge at any point of time, what the nature of the issue is. So while it is correct that the government in 2018 filed an affidavit saying that they do not oppose the decriminalization of homosexuality, it's not as though they came out and said, please do go ahead and do it. They said, we leave it to court, which of course was kind of a...
Well, it's better than opposition.
It was not really a vehement opposition. But
to look the other way.
But in any case, government has no option but to look the other way. The court will exactly decide what it wants to decide.
It could technically bring in an ordinance.
Well, not really. If the Section 377 is read down on the ground of it being violative of a fundamental right, then you can't bring an ordinance because that would require amendment to the Constitution.
It would require a constitutional amendment in Parliament.
And you wouldn't require...
2/3 and ratification and all.
And then subject to the basic structure doctrine. Because the kind of rights you would have to amend would be Articles 14, which is right to equality, Article 19(1)(a), right to free expression, and Article 21, the right to life. Each of these three articles have been said to form a golden triangle, which are virtually inviolable. So I don't think this could have happened even by amendment to the Constitution. But of course, luckily that never came to pass. We will never find out.
Yeah. Tell me this, how tough was it to come out to your family? Your father was, former Chief Justice, and I don't know how his first response was, because I'm sure there was his constitutional training in the principles of equality, and then there was him being a regular Indian parent.
Well, I think the constitutional equality won in that battle. I was very apprehensive to come out to them.
How old were you when you did it?
I was quite old. I was 28 or 29. I was quite old. I'd met my partner by then. My father was a judge of the Supreme Court when I came out. He was quite senior at that point of time. Shortly was about to become Chief Justice. I had 2 years earlier left the country. I had gone to Geneva because I didn't want to be in India when my father was a senior judge. And to be part of the pulls and pressures that often children of judges face. So I thought best to remove myself. I was working with the UN, so I was very happy. So I came back and I sat them down. It was a very formal thing that, look, I have something to tell you. And I told them I am gay. There's not much else you can pad a thing like that by. And their immediate reaction was just so positive and so affirming.
Did they know already?
Well, my mother said, I had sort of thought about it and I had spoken to your father. And my father said, I didn't think so.
Yeah.
But both of them said that it doesn't really matter and that they loved me. And what mattered to them was my happiness. And everything else would be dealt with. It was actually an extremely joyful moment for me. It was a weight off my shoulders.
Yeah, really. Not have to hide.
Yes, absolutely. From the people I loved most.
Yeah.
To tell an untruth to people you love most, not just to hide it, but you actually positively have to lie.
Yeah.
Because you can't say I'm asexual, or you could, I suppose.
I mean, you could.
but you have to pretend to be straight. Now that's actively lying, and that eats away at you yourself, but partly because there are people you love and you can't speak to them. And I had a very close relationship with my parents, and I still do. So it was a weight off my shoulder, and I hope everyone else can have that kind of an coming out.
Well, not everyone's families do
No, it's
respond, at least the first time around, with ease. It takes persuasion, it takes time. How homophobic is the legal world?
Again, it's like me saying that I'm not offended by Twitter. People don't believe it. But for me personally...
You have not experienced homophobia? So you mean the last time you experienced homophobia was in school?
No, I face homophobia on a daily basis. Just not in the legal, in my workspace.
So on the daily basis, how do you face
On a
it?
daily basis, well, when I read social media, I'll get homophobic slurs. So that's one way. Less so after Navtej Johar. After 2018, it's come down. But till then... as I said, every time I saw a stereotypical image of a person dancing, whatever else, was homophobia. I think homophobia is not just about going up to a gay man and insulting him to his face and saying, you are so-and-so, or going to a lesbian or a trans person and abusing them. Homophobia can be very subtle, the way sexism can be very subtle. It need not be in your face.
It's casual, it's everyday, it's in language.
It's systemic also.
Systemic.
So that homophobia does exist.
Well, friends, I have a friend, Parmesh Sahani, whom you must know as well. And he did a lot of work on how the law has changed, but employment opportunities are not equal. Now, you are self-employed, and therefore you may not experience this, or you may, I don't know. But when it comes to hiring, despite commitments to D&I, diversity and inclusion, that it's not so easy.
Absolutely right. See, personally, I don't feel discrimination today at the workspace because I come clothed with privilege.
Yes.
As you said, I was a son of a
former Chief Justice.
And when I started my practice, he was a sitting judge. Of course, then I ran away. But nevertheless, that protection continued. And I understand and I see very often that a lot of younger lawyers, especially those who are not from so to say, elite families, or who don't join the constitutional courts, the High Court or the Supreme Court, who work in the trial courts, or who are from the smaller cities, do face discrimination. There's no question of it. But the question was directed whether I faced, so I answered in a particular way.
But you made a comment, I think, at the Kolkata Literary Meet while discussing one of your books. You spoke about the bench in terms of being upper caste, upper class, and male, predominantly.
See, I think that was said in a context to a question as to whether I feel I would be biased. And I said, no, judges are not biased, but judges have certain points of view. And a judge may be upper caste. Does that mean a judge is biased? No, that judge is upper caste. That judge is male. A judge is heterosexual. The way a judge can be female, can be non-binary, can be gay, whatever else. Those are not biases as much as traits of a person, and which influence the decision-making process, however subliminally. It need not be overt.
Yeah.
The way bullying isn't and homophobia isn't. Your thought process is not often overt. It can be a result of your upbringing. And just because you're heterosexual doesn't mean you will be automatically anti-gay rights, because the 5 judges who sat on the Navtej Johar judgment were all heterosexuals. In Suresh Kaushal, who ruled otherwise, were both heterosexuals. So it's not as simplistic as that.
And your sexuality is one part of you, and it's not the entire, sort of sum of you. I do want to actually talk a little bit about the courts, where you are more than possibly India's first openly gay judge. You have written a very interesting book looking at 15 big verdicts out of the court. And there's a lot of debate right now about, is our judiciary really autonomous? Is it not autonomous? And the debate carries on, and there's an element of, in my opinion, confirmation bias. When something goes your way, then the judges are great. When it doesn't, But you have also, in earlier conversations, flagged concerns about delays in hearing cases, how cases are scheduled. Even on marriage equality, there was a certain amount of debate. Why has this subject been prioritized ahead of other cases that have been awaiting the bench's attention? If you were to step back and just look at the sort of interplay between the courts and the executive and the legislator, at a time when there has been some ferocious public debate around the Collegium, around the basic structure, even the basic structure doctrine, how do you see things?
Well, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose.
The more things change, the more they remain the same. Yes.
So you say there's a ferocious debate now in the public domain about the role of courts, the interplay between the executive and the courts. That's always been the case because that is the nature of our constitution. You have now a system of checks and balances, the court checking the judiciary, the executive and parliament. The moment you have a check, that check will not be liked by the person who are being checked. And one natural reaction is to attack the checker. So that's a constitutional framework that's going to happen, that has happened for the last 75 years of our republic, starting from the First Amendment of 1951. The Constituent Assembly itself amends the Constitution and takes away fundamental rights, including a right that allowed sedition to be revived.
By the way, the Law Commission has recommended greater punishment for sedition rather than doing away with it completely.
I hope the courts do what the Constitution requires them to do.
Which is,
I think, personally, sedition today does not have a place in our dogma of free speech. It really doesn't. In as much as someone calls to someone to arms and incites violence, that can be dealt with, right? The actual call. But sedition per se, inevitably is such a loose term, as it will have to be, that its chilling effect is much greater than any good it may accomplish. Yeah. And I don't even think that it accomplishes very much good. If there are people who are disaffected, who are seeking revolution, they have to be handled through other modalities of the criminal law. You go and catch those people and try them for the crimes that they have committed or are attempting to commit.
So you think sedition should be read down and other laws can take care of national security concerns?
We have a large number of laws already which take care of that. And I'm a believer in strong criminal law to ensure that the unity and the integrity of our country is maintained. I just don't believe that speech alone accomplishes some of this. But and one reason I say that is we've had examples of other countries which don't have obnoxious sedition laws and yet are more unified than our country. Yeah. So I think there's a different story to disaffection in public.
So let's come back to this debate around the Collegium. You speak of checks and balances. Critics of the Collegium say that, it is unprecedented that A, judges appoint themselves, B, that even the basic structure is not written into the Constitution. This idea that there is a basic structure to our Constitution is derived from a court judgment, right? And therefore, why should there not be the supremacy of Parliament over all of this? You would say what?
Very simple. I mean, who says Parliament is supreme? Allegedly the Constitution, right?
So it's the Constitution that is supreme.
So yes, in our framework, the ultimate authority really is the Constitution. So Parliament is not supreme. And the moment we accept that Parliament is not supreme, the question then arises, if the Constitution is supreme, who says what the Constitution is? What does the Constitution say? And the Constitution itself gives that right to the Supreme Court. So when the Supreme Court, under our Constitution, interprets and says, this is what the Constitution says, it's not a violation of the doctrine of constitutional supremacy. It is a violation of the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. But we don't have a doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty in our country. The sovereign is the Constitution, the sovereign are the people of India who have given to themselves this Constitution. So the basic structure is, I think, I would have thought a very accepted and fairly non-controversial idea, but anything can be made controversial. Supposing, for instance, Parliament were tomorrow to amend the Constitution and say that this current Parliament will now be Parliament for eternity or for 20 years, 25 years. Well, theoretically,
They can do it.
They can do it. So would you say that, look, parliamentary sovereignty, there is nothing? Supposing Parliament was to amend the constitution and say that we have a dictatorship and we now appoint someone as a king or queen of India and to rule by decree, would we say that's parliamentary democracy and say,
but you are taking extreme examples to make your point.
No, it's not. That is why. So you understand that obviously, therefore, Parliament is not supreme. Right? Parliament doesn't have unbridled powers of amendment. So it can't go to an extreme. Then the question is, where is that line to be drawn? And the debate is, who decides where that line is to be drawn? So we go away from the question as to whether there is a basic structure doctrine or not. The answer is clearly there is, because you cannot have a kingdom or a dictatorship. So you agree that there is an idea of a basic structure. The dispute then moves to what is the basic structure and who has the right to decide the basic structure. Well, if the Supreme Court has the right to interpret Article 21, 19, every other article, then why not the basic structure? That's a constitutional scheme of things.
Is there a better way, though, to choose judges?
There are always, this is reminding me of the argument against democracy. That
is there a better system than democracy with all its imperfections? It's the best we have.
It's the best.
Is that how you feel about the Collegium?
I have increasingly come.
But there are interesting changes in the court, right? These kind of public statements, owning your disagreements. When Uday Lalit was Chief Justice, the fact that he disagreed with present Chief Justice Chandrachud, all of this was placed in the public domain. I think it's healthy.
I think it's very healthy. To say that there is opacity is not fair and it's not correct. On the one hand, courts are actually one of the most open places there are. They hear arguments in open. They give their judgments in open. Collegium recommendations are put out there in the open. Now, can I ask the same of Parliament or the executive? Do I know why someone has been made a cabinet minister or has not been made a cabinet minister? Why has someone been given a portfolio? Why has someone's portfolio been taken away from them? Now,
why has Kiren Rijiju been sacked?
Well, I'm not taking any names, but cabinets are formed every day.
Yeah.
Posts are assigned every day.
Yeah.
Now, why do we not expect transparency there? We expect judges who are unelected to be open, and we do not expect the same kind of transparency from members of parliament who are elected. So I think that's being a bit disingenuous on part of people to say that there is opacity. No, there isn't. Every decision that a Supreme Court takes has reasons. You may agree with the reasons, you may disagree with the reasons. Can I say the same of the executive or parliament? Parliament doesn't give any reasons. It comes out with an enactment for whatever reason. There is often no debate in parliament, so we don't know what the reason is. In executive, policy decisions are taken. It's only when that policy is challenged in court that sometimes reasons come out. And now that we have RTI, sometimes reasons come out. But often that does not happen. So really, I think one of the most open institutions in the country today is the courts.
Do you have disappointments with the courts?
Well, of course you would.
What are yours?
I think there are, in matters of, say, sedition, for instance, I think that matter should be prioritized and heard quickly. Of course, government has said we are going to change the law. So maybe that'll happen. And, maybe I have the impatience of someone who wants to see change. And judges have a bit more experience. Sometimes they realize that let things happen by themselves.
Play themselves out.
And I think that may have been the reason why initially there was a stay by Justice Ramanna on these sedition cases. And we've seen that there has been a calming down, really. So maybe I'm wrong there, but I am a person who's slightly impatient about seeing changes. About free speech, I think, while inevitably the courts ultimately do come to the aid of the person who's speaking.
But it takes a long time.
It takes a long time. So that's what I was saying. That's where I am disappointed. Our criminal process, I think that's another thing that I'm disappointed with, that it takes, and courts here, I think the Supreme Court is much better in granting bail to people. But the trial courts do not grant bail to under trial prisoners. And prisons are full of under trials. There is a fear that the process is a punishment. I find that a disappointment, that our trial courts are not doing the job that is entrusted to them. It's become fashionable only to look at the Supreme Court and sometimes the High Court when we are talking about the judicial system in India.
Yeah.
But the greatest interaction a person has as a citizen of India with the court system is the trial court. That bail application, that discharge application, that challan that you have to go and do. And the trial courts in our country, unfortunately, need a very deep degree of reform that has to come both from the courts and the executive. Ultimately, there needs to be greater financing. We need far more judges. There's a massive backlog of cases. There is delay, which then really pulls back economic growth.
Is there a verdict in particular that has disappointed you? You know, there was the time, for example, when Justice Singhvi, he held homosexuality to be something that should remain criminal. He spoke about, a minuscule number of people being impacted and so on. He was a Supreme Court judge. It was a disappointing verdict. I mean, I remember all of us criticizing it. Is there a verdict at the highest court, that has disappointed you?
I can straight away think of one, which is the judgment in the matter of the prevention of money laundering, which upheld the constitutionality of it. While certain parts may be constitutional, I think the reversal of the presumption of innocence and having very stringent bail conditions.
Yeah.
Now, those I think were very disappointing that they were upheld, because there's an incongruity in it, in as much as what is money laundering? Money laundering is you generate ill-gotten wealth through some crime, say by theft or cheating. Then that money is laundered, shown to be clean money. Now, cleaning itself and laundering is an offense, and for that you don't get bail. It's very stringent. But the actual act of theft and cheating, that is an offense under the Indian Penal Code, for which there is no such restriction. Now, it's ridiculous that the substantive offense by which you've generated that illegal money, you can get bail, but you can't get bail for laundering.
Yeah.
So this is just strange, and it is then often abused by officials. Ultimately,
it becomes a political weapon in a way, or politicized weapon is
maybe
probably more
I often
accurate.
think also the department officials also have an agenda of their own.
Yeah.
It's not always political.
Yeah.
There are the way we see in police, it's not always the political bosses who would say.
Yeah, it's the police itself. Yes.
And that's why we have a check and balance of the court. And that was another thing the judgment did not do. It removed the overview that a court does on any investigation. Yeah. So that's one judgment I'm very disappointed with in terms recently, which is done. And
yet in the end, I should remind you that I think you said that courts are not places for revolutions, yet a revolution sometimes takes place every day in India's court. I end with asking you to talk about something that you would like to usher in as change if you had the chance.
It's again a very boring thing, and I've just spoken about it a few minutes ago, which is speedy justice.
Right.
I really think justice stops having any significance or meaning if it is delayed. People talked about how the marriage equality case was fast-tracked. It wasn't. It's come, as I said, 75 years too late. But every case deserves to be heard. Every voice of the oppressed, or indeed the rich and famous, needs to be heard. We need 10 times the number of judges that we have today. The judge-to-population ratio in India is amongst the lowest in the world. We need greater infrastructure for judges so that they have adequate staff. I was speaking to some lower court judges the other day, some informal conversation, and they say they have to dictate their own orders. Now, you are supposed to hear the cases, read the files, type your own orders, upload them. It's not possible for any one person to do, and this is in the absence of them even having Wi-Fi or computers. So they bring their own computer, their own Wi-Fi. And this ultimately really bogs down the system. And for instance, the free speech point we were talking about earlier. If someone is abusing you, you go to court, ask for them to be sued under defamation. The defamer can sit very happily because you know that it will be another 5, 10, 15 years if the matter is ever heard. Damages may not be awarded, or nominal damages. In any case, in matters of news, it's a matter of the moment. It has to be done quickly. So I think in matters of bail, it's important that you should not spend one extra day in custody. It's very easy for us who have our liberty to sit and say, all right, okay, you get your bail a week later, a month later, 6 months later. I think if anyone has spent one day in jail, I've been fortunate not to. I hope you have as well.
I haven't, yes.
Yes, I've been free from that. But a day of custody, which is wrongful, can be so demeaning that it is not something our constitution should permit. And yet it happens every day because courts are overloaded.
Yeah.
And courts are overloaded. Also, the investigating authorities are overloaded.
Yeah.
It's a problem. We need to invest a lot more in systems. And that is what we need to have. Faith in systems more than people.
Even more ironic that you are not a judge yet. I'm going to underline the yet part and hope that the next time I ask you for an interview, you tell me, I can't speak to you, I'm a judge now. Saurabh Kirpal, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Barkha. And it reminded me of school. And let me end by saying school wasn't all bad.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It was quite lovely. It was quite
in
lovely,
its own way, for its own time.
Yeah. And I tend to dwell on the sweet. I had some great friends in school. I loved my academics in school. I think that joy that I have today of reading was instilled in school.
Yeah.
And, I loved it there as well.
So hold on to the good moments.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.